Have you ever had a friend who feels just like a cheat code for life? That's Sheena for me. Not only is she a wonderful friend, but she's a mental health therapist. She's been my go-to in many moments, especially when I felt just completely disconnected from myself. I'm excited to bring her into the wiggle room and to share some of her wisdom with you all. Sheena is the founder of Metanoia Alliance Therapy, where she helps people with trauma amongst many other of life's complexities. And we've shared a ton of conversations over the years. She's someone who truly gets what it means to show up for yourself when life feels messy. Today, we're going to dive into trauma, how it rewires your brain. We're also going to touch on my favorite lesson that Sheena has shared with me, and that's impact versus intent. Um, Sheena, I always tell people that having a mental health therapist as a friend is a complete cheat code to life. As I mentioned earlier, you've been a grounding force in my life for many, many topics. And I'd love for you to just share what drew you to being a therapist and why you named your practice Metanoia Alliance Therapy.
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I have been in the field since 2018, and I don't have I guess it's a cliche answer, but growing up, I just kind of had the skill set and was always the supporter to the friends that I had. And I think I was just born with a very empathetic and compassionate soul. And that's what drew me into being a therapist.
I love that. Yeah, you do definitely have a natural gift to show up for people. As I said, you've done that for me. Um, showing up for people it doesn't naturally come to everybody. Um, so you feel like you were blessed with with that gift, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in a humble, I guess, kind of form, but I've learned actually through being in my practice and being a therapist that I thought everyone kind of had that gift. And it wasn't until I got into it that I recognized that not a lot of people reflect and are self-aware.
Yeah, that
So
self-aware is a big practice. Takes takes a lot of understanding of yourself. Um, can you touch on why you named your practice Metanoia Alliance Therapy?
yeah, I opened my practice in 2021 and started to try to like get into the weeds of like why I wanted to name my practice what it was back in 2020 when COVID hit. It was a really interesting time for therapy and moving into like virtual therapy and mental health. So metanoia is a Greek term that means changing one's mind, heart, self, and way of life. And so that really stood out to me when I was looking things over because that's what the foundation of my practice is. And I think a lot of the times people have a preconceived notion as to what therapy is, which is that you go to therapy, the therapist gives you the advice, and then boom, you're cured. And it's not actually like that. It's rather the opposite, where we are taught to not give advice and allow the clients the autonomy to make their own choices without, like, whether that's what I would do for myself or not. My opinion on it doesn't really matter, even if it's right or wrong. So that's where the alliance comes in to my practice name, is the togetherness, like the collaboration of changing one's mind, heart, self, and way of life.
I love that. I think that's incredible. I didn't know that was, what they said I guess in the therapy world, right? So it's essentially not, when you walk into a session with someone, you're not like, hey, you're going to do X, Y, and Z. It's more of a collaboration. I think that's beautiful. And I think it allows for a deeper connection with your clients, right? I mean, is it hard to develop a connection with clients when you're first starting to work with them, or do you feel like it's usually pretty natural to fit into that?
I think that depends on the therapist. For me, it's always come really easily. And I don't know if that's because going through school and supporting myself, I worked in the service industry. So I was building connections and kind of being people's therapist through bartending. And so when I got into like working with people, I think my my biggest asset in therapy is allowing people the comfortability and building that relationship. That's something that's been like very organic for me in my practice.
Mm. I mean, I definitely feel that when we have conversations, for sure. Sometimes you are a little bit hard on me. I get free therapy for those that don't know, but we have a fair trade off. I helped Sheena earlier this year buy a house. So we have a very fair trade off. I feel
Yeah.
if I had $1 for every time that you asked me about refinancing, I probably retired by now.
Oh, absolutely. And when is that happening?
um, but I wanna dive into the topic that I mentioned at the start of the show, and it's something that has completely changed how I um, connect and understand people. I would say in moments of conflict, and that's the concept that you shared with me on impact versus intent. And we've had our disagreements on it. Can you share exactly what that means and how that helps us better connect with people?
Yeah. I think a big part that stood out for me when I learned the concept of impact versus intent is that people, when they make mistakes or hurt someone else's feelings, they become defensive because of their own shame. And so they result back to, but it wasn't my intentions. And that's not what that's about. It's about being able to recognize that even if you had pure intentions, you may have left a residual impact with someone that received what you were doing differently. And a quick example to that, and this was something that I had a conversation about when I was learning about this concept, was someone's mother-in-law had come into town, and the in-laws had good intentions with purchasing kitchen tools and organization for this person that I was speaking with. And they came in and started rearranging things, and they had good intentions. And that left the receiver not feeling good about it. They felt like their autonomy was stripped. They didn't have control over their own home, and it just didn't leave a good impact. And so when you go to communicate with somebody like, hey, I this doesn't make me feel good, people result back to, but my intentions were good. And that could be true. But that doesn't mean that you guys can't coexist with one another to figure out how can we work together to solve the problem. And that's what the takeaway I think is for me with impact, is that both parts can exist at the same time.
Do you, and again, this is conversation you and I have had before, do you think that practice or that strategy or theory can come into play in every conversation, or do you feel like it's for certain things?
I don't know if I have like a black and white way to answer that question. I think it can be situational. I think the difficult part with it, though, and this is where you and I maybe have butt heads about it in the past, is that sometimes it could be used poorly through manipulation, where people want to be heard. And so they will say like, that you can twist the narrative a little bit, where it's like, but that didn't leave that impact. And it just can get a little bit murky. So I don't know if I can answer that question directly. I'm sure you can bring it into every conversation while recognizing like your own shame and trying not to be defensive within it. But yeah.
Yeah, I think again, it's been I practice it often, and I share it with as many people as I can, because I think that, and it takes awareness and constant practice from both sides, right? To understand that even though I think the person who has caused the negative impact, even though they had good intention, I think it takes a lot of self-discipline and understanding to be aware enough to say like, hey, I know what I was, I know my intentions were good, but I know that the impact that I left is negative. And I think it takes a certain kind of person or a lot of practice to understand that, like, hey, my message just didn't hit the way that I wanted it to. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, that's been super important for me. If you're listening, I hope that you take that and use that moving forward, because it will change how you interact with humans and people you care about in your life. Speaking of tough moments, life itself can feel very overwhelming at times, right? We juggle a lot between work, family, personal growth. Um, what is a practice or a strategy that you could share or recommend for people who are managing just being overwhelmed?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Slowing down. I think a big thing that I talk about, whether it's with like friends, my loved ones, or people that I'm working with, is that in order to accomplish something, you have to break the goal into bite-sized pieces. And if you have so many things going on, you're more inclined to make mistakes. And so it's important to just focus on the 1%. What's the 1% in that day? What is it that you have to accomplish in that day? Don't focus on kind of like what Kobe Bryant said. And I'll probably butcher the quote.
We respect Kobe. It's okay.
We do. But it's not about the destination. It's about the journey. So focusing on the journey in a way that you're really breaking it down and not overwhelming yourself is key.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for bringing in Kobe.
Always.
RIP.
Yes.
Yeah, I think again, that's huge, is like, because when you feel overwhelmed, sometimes you just don't even know where to start. I mean, me personally, I wear many hats, from managing to coaching to running an office, running a team, running a business, doing a podcast. And some days it all just feels like too heavy to where like I don't even know where to start. So sometimes the way I'll start is I'll write it all down, right? To tie it back to what you said about just breaking it all into bite-sized pieces and just starting with one. I mean, do you have any recommendation? Would you start with the hardest first or the easiest first?
Yeah.
What would you say?
Yeah, I think this is actually good too, working with people that struggle with ADHD, is a lot of the times you're told to write lists, which lists are good. But what you'd want to do is you want to prioritize your list on what has to get done and start with that. If you have a list of 10, you're going to narrow it down to 3 and you're going to put the other 7 to the side, because all the other 7 are distractions. You're going to lose focus on what has to get done because it's maybe like the quicker thing, or the more simple thing. And so, yeah, my recommendation is always to start with like what has to get done today. Like what's your non-negotiable?
Yeah. I think, yeah, that's great. For me, sometimes it just depends on how I'm feeling that day. Sometimes I'll look at my list and I'm like, ooh, that's the hard one. I don't know if I want to climb that mountain yet. And then, but I'll jump into that. But then there's some days where I'm like, hey, I just need to get some momentum rolling. So like, give me 3 easy things that I can knock out and start feeling good about myself.
Yeah.
And then I jump into, and it just helps me steamroll into the rest of my day.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I think another tip that's really good for that is, I guess this is like something for like organization and cleaning, but it could be used in other areas, is like, give yourself 1 hour, whatever you can get done in that hour, you get done. And after that, move on, right? Like if you aren't able to get everything done, you can set some time aside later, but it can kind of help decrease feeling overwhelmed that like I have to work for 9 hours to get everything done. Just focus on what you can get done, in an hour or 30 minutes.
The next thing I want to dive into is trauma. So it's a big topic. Again, it's been something that you've taught me a ton about that I didn't even know. And a lot of it was kind of hard to hear, and how it changes us. You've helped me understand that trauma is not something we feel. It's something that changes our brain. Can you talk about how trauma rewires our brain?
Yeah. This is probably something that I am the most passionate about in my practice. I think that it gives people the ability to be more patient with themselves and lean in with grace, because what happens, the term used is neuroplasticity. So that means that it's your brain's ability to adapt and change based on the circumstances that come and your experience within it. And the beauty within that is that it doesn't have to be just your brain adapting to what trauma is. So it's like you're normal and then now you're not normal, but your brain has the ability to revert back to your old self, if you want to allow it to, or a new beautiful version of yourself. The brain is a very, very beautiful and powerful thing. But when it comes to trauma, what happens is I think a common term that we're all aware of is your fight or flight, your fight, flight, freeze mechanism.
I've heard you say that.
So there's three parts of the brain that I'll focus on when giving like context around this. But you have your amygdala, which I'll refer to as the alarm, just because it's a little bit easier to understand, but that is the emotional part of your brain that is responsible for emotion regulation, but it's also what activates your fight or flight response. So when you endure trauma, your alarm can get turned and stuck on, which means that it's not accessing the other parts of your brain that it needs to be able to handle things maybe the way that you once did or without the need to survive. So that's what happens when you endure traumas. The alarm gets turned on and gets stuck on. What you can do is try to focus on educating yourself about the other areas of the brain. So we have the hippocampus. I don't know if that's a familiar term.
Not familiar at all. Thank you.
Essentially, that's your memory bank. And that's what like stores and organizes all your memory and all the information. And then in the prefrontal cortex, that's like your thinking and logical part of the brain. And so what you want to be able to do is have your alarm indicate, hey, let me pay attention to this, because your alarm's not your enemy. You need the amygdala to survive, but you want it to be able to channel the memory to say, do I need to handle it this way? Or can I slow down and handle it a different way? And then it moves into the thinking center of your brain, which says, what's the logical decision to make? But when you endure trauma, you don't have those parts of your brain. They become kind of blocked off. And so that's where like reaching out to a professional can be really helpful, because they can give you the tools to figure out how can you regain access to those parts of the brain.
And that was a great description. I've never heard you break it down like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Kind of like driving a car without brakes. That's what trauma is.
Wow.
Yeah, like you can't slow down.
So I heard you mention the amygdala, which is the alarm part of the brain, right? So I don't know enough about this. This is why you're here. So when the alarm part of our brain goes off, is that essentially us being rattled?
Yeah.
And then when that happens, when we suffer trauma, let's say someone that is going through maybe domestic abuse, right? When something like that happens, their alarm goes off, and then they don't have access to the memory bank and the logical thinking part of their brain. Is that essentially what you're saying?
When the trauma occurs, you want your alarm to act in that way. That's what's going to get you to safety and survival. So when you are in a DV situation, your body is going into exactly what it needs to do, which is your fight, flight, freeze mechanism. But what happens later on is, let's say that in the relationship that had domestic violence in it, let's say they would look at you a certain way, and then you're no longer in that relationship. You go to work, and let's say your boss looks at you in that way, and now you're triggered. Your fight or flight, your alarm gets turned on, and now you're not always able to access the other parts of your brain to say, wait, hold on. This memory is coming from my past. I'm not in danger right now. So instead, you become reactive. And that can look different for everyone. Reactive doesn't always have to be outwardly, but it could be more like inward, where you're having a panic attack, right? Or where your brain is like being override by anything logical. And it's just like, I need to get to safety. I need to get to safety, when you're not actually in danger.
So when someone experiences trauma, we're just using a different example, right? Emotional abuse. And the alarm goes off, the memory bank, the logical thing, because that's the order it goes in, yes?
Yep.
Okay. So when the alarm goes off from the first time someone experiences emotional abuse, that memory or that feeling goes into their memory bank is okay. And so when something like that comes up again or looks familiar to that, right? So maybe they're experiencing emotional abuse for the second time. And I'm going into creating like pathways, right? So that's essentially the first path that's created in that walkway of how they're going to respond to emotional abuse, was how they responded to it the first time.
Not necessarily. I mean, I think that could be an option, but let's say that you were going through some type of emotional abuse and you shut down when the trauma actually occurred. You may have a different response when it happens again, where you may say to yourself, I'm not going to shut down like I did before, so I'm going to fight it out. And then that's when like arguments occur.
So that's the fight or flight that you mentioned. okay, so just because they shut down the first time in experiencing emotional abuse doesn't necessarily mean that that's how they're going to show up and respond
Every time.
every
Right.
time. Is it either, and I know I'm being super just like straightforward. Is it either fight or flight every time?
Free.
Is that how we respond?
Freeze or fawn. I think fawn's like a new one that's incorporated where essentially you're just like people pleasing to minimize the situation.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think you're going to respond differently each time. Sometimes it may be the same, but and maybe it's just kind of luck of the draw. You don't really know because your alarm is hijacking every logical part of you that you don't know which way it's going to go.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. I mean, again, so grateful for our relationship because you've taught me so many things. And I remember when you and I were discussing some trauma that I went through, and I was like, man, I don't know why I'm feeling like this because I had not felt like that ever before. And you were like, Matt, you experienced trauma, like you're not going to feel the same. And I apologize if I didn't, like, if you were clear on this already. I'm just coming back so I can have a better understanding and better for people who are listening. So when I said that, or when you told me that, you're like, you're not going to feel the same. I mean, what is happening? Is that something that's tied to the memory part of my brain that you mentioned, or is that tied to the logical part of my brain?
It's tied to the alarm because your alarm, your amygdala is attached to your vagal nerve. So it shoots messages down your body to say you are in danger, which then comes all of those somatic symptoms of like adrenaline, your heart racing, feeling really tense. Everything's connected, throughout your body, but it's your alarm that's causing you to respond that way.
Is is your alarm tied into depression at all?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Okay.
Depression, anxiety, anger, anything reactive.
Okay. So that's why when people experience trauma, right, or whatever, sometimes they go into depression, or sometimes they can be angry or sad. Now, is there certain things that trigger that alarm to, I guess, ring longer than normal? Right? Like what I mean by that is like, oh, this has me mad, and like I'm not mad just for like 2 minutes. I'm mad until tomorrow.
I think it can be. I think it depends on where you are in your journey of healing. And I think it also depends on if you're aware. Because I think even like when you and I had talked about it, when you were saying that you had experienced something traumatic, you at that time weren't aware of what's going on, which means that you're very early on in that journey. So it just depends on where somebody's at based on like how long they're gonna, I guess, sit in that.
Okay. And we'll touch on the healing process on that because that's something that's been very helpful for me. Um, what are some ways we can navigate a path forward after experiencing trauma?
I think it definitely does start with seeking some level of professional help. Not everybody has the resources to do so, and so using your resources, whether that's through like social media, even though it can be
Touch and go.
damaging in its
Yeah.
way, there's a lot of knowledgeable information that comes from social media. So whether it's social media, whether it's talking to your support system, it's super important to access your support system. You do want to make sure that you trust who you're going to and that they are going to not be, I guess, biased, and be as non-judgmental as possible. But yeah, I think that's the start to someone's healing is awareness.
As awareness. I mean, is there any? I mean, do you have any book recommendations? Do you have any? I mean, anything that you could recommend to somebody who maybe doesn't have resources, right? That maybe would be a good, day one, step one towards that.
I don't know if I have any book recommendations specifically on trauma. However, the book that I will through and through recommend to anyone that's looking for recommendations is always going to be The Four Agreements.
Great book. Great book. Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of knowledge that comes from that book in a very simplified form where it's not so overwhelming. It's not this like heavy book.
Right.
It's
an easy read. There's four agreements,
Yep.
right, in there that are very good to live by. Something that I try to honor every day. So if you haven't read it, please do. It's like a great starter book.
Definitely.
The other thing I want to talk about regarding trauma is pathways. It's something that I hear a lot, but I don't know enough about. So I guess when you experience trauma, I talked about it a little bit earlier, is we create these certain kind of pathways in our brain. Is that accurate, or am I completely wrong?
I guess, what do you mean by that?
Like what is it, neural pathways that we create in our brain when we experience some kind of trauma? And if I'm wrong, to say you don't know what the hell you're talking about.
I don't think you're wrong. I don't think I fully understand, I guess, the
The question.
question. But I think everything goes back to like hormones and like the chemicals in your body, right? And I think that those are like essentially coming from the alarm that we talked about. And it what happens is it shoots signals down the vagal nerve to the rest of your body, and that's where you can overproduce maybe serotonin, which is what, or underproduce, which causes depression. I think that it can peak your cortisol, which is really important to be mindful of because that breaks down your immune system and can cause a whole set of other issues for yourself. I don't know if that's what you mean by the question, though.
Yeah, I think no, it's just stuff that I've read online, right? About creating these pathways in your brain that once you run through those halls for such a long time, that it's hard to not run down those same paths. So if you reacted the same way for a certain for 10, 20 years of your life, in order for you to not do that, you have to create a new pathway, I guess is what I'm referring to. But
Yeah, I mean, I think when I hear that, what comes to my mind is more like reframing your thinking habits, which I think a lot of new therapists knock CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, but I find it to be really important for trauma. It's an evidence-based practice that helps you essentially rewire your brain back, which is like recognizing your thoughts, how they attribute to your emotions, and how that attributes to your behaviors in this like infinite loop that comes with that. And so that can kind of help with the pathways.
yeah, no, that's good. I mean, that definitely ties into what I was talking about. I want to talk about the healing process after trauma. It's something I've struggled with personally, and I think it's a lot of other people can relate to it. And it's just wanting to rush the process. I mean, I've asked you many times, when am I going to be over this? When am I going to be over this? Why do you think it's so important for people to not rush their process?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. Because I guess the simplified answer to this is that you will never get to a place of self-love through a place of self-hate. And when you're being hard on yourself and saying, when is this going to be done? When am I going to be over this? You're essentially rushing the process, and it's through a place of impatience and lack of compassion for yourself, which isn't going to actually get you to what that destination is, which is to like feel whole again, or to love yourself again, or to, I mean, just take care of your basic necessities.
Yeah, I think it's hard to not feel stuck, right? I mean, I'll go back to what I said. It was just like there was times I felt stuck, and I know other people feel stuck often just through conversations like, "Hey, I'm stuck on this. Why can't I get past it?" Um, I think one of the things too is people ruminate, right? That's again is something else that you've said that, hey, you do this a lot. Um, what do you think is something that people can do or what's something that people can put into place or practice who ruminate often, right? Because I think that's part of what keeps you stuck in your healing process.
Yeah. I mean, I think what this reminds me of is that people often refer to time, like once enough time passes, you're going to be over it. And I counter that with, it's not the time, it's what you do with the time. And as cliche as it is, I think a big part of healing is going back to the basics and taking care of yourself and nurturing yourself, maybe in a way that whether you had as a child or that you didn't, but making sure that you're eating, making sure that you're drinking water, making sure that you wake up and you are practicing kindness with yourself and patience with yourself. What you tell yourself in the morning will dictate how your day will go. And if you wake up saying another day, your day is not going to be great. It's not going to be good. It's going to continue with that same momentum. So I think my biggest advice, again, as cliche as it is to go back to the basics, focus on deep breathing. Journaling is really important. The brain can't process information just in the mind, which is why rumination is so detrimental. It needs to be produced outwardly, whether that's talking to somebody or journaling about it. And so that allows your brain to kind of like pick up on what you mean, because otherwise you're going to send yourself into this spiral that really has like no meaning behind it.
And what do you which brings me to another topic is internal processors versus versus external processors,
Yeah.
right? Um I'm definitely an external processor. Can you explain what that is, or maybe like what the difference is between the two?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty self-explanatory or like simple where I mean there's people that you may run into, whether it's like, let's say work, because I think we spend most of our time there, where everything they do, they say out loud. And you kind of are sitting there wondering, like, why are they saying this? Like, why are they speaking out loud to themselves? That is the definition of someone that externally processes. They just need to get it out. They're not, it's kind of like mindless. They don't necessarily need you to pay attention and respond to it, but they need to be able to get it out. Whereas some people are able to just do that internally. So yeah, I guess that's.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting because I have friends that are internal. I'm like, man, how do you just walk around with that? You know? And then you
Yeah.
have external process who are just like word vomiting everywhere. And I'm like, whoa, like you probably should keep that to yourself. But I get it as someone who does externally process, like I understand. Um, do you think there's a better way, either or?
No, I think just like everything in life, it's about balance. I think, like you said, like it can be really heavy and hard for people that are internal processors. I'm an internal processor, so I think that's where you and I have always been different, but it works for us within our friendship. But people that internally process can be a little bit more private, and so they don't access their support system as much, and that can be really hard and heavy for them because they're not getting that release that I had mentioned, where like you need a journal about it or talk about it. So I don't think that there's a right or wrong way. I think there's pros and cons to both options. You just have to figure out what's the healthy, balanced version.
Yeah, for someone who's an internal processor, what do you think? I mean, I know you mentioned, I think you mentioned journaling would be a good way for them to kind of um, work through whatever they're dealing with. Is there anything else you think that an internal process could be a benefit to an internal processor?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think journaling has to be maybe what we expect it to be. Like, it doesn't have to be so rigid of like pen to paper journaling. I think I mean, it could be, and it also could be guided in some form or like some form of guided meditation. But I think something else, which I think you and I have talked about this previously, but something that I recommend to my clients that they hate journaling is to video journal, to record yourself saying what you need to say out loud. If you're private, that way no one else has to be tuned into what you're saying and what you're feeling if it feels too vulnerable for you, but it gives you the ability to still get it out and to release it, because you'll start to pick up on your own patterns. And when you're saying something out loud or when you're writing it, you're more inclined to check yourself on if you're ruminating or not.
One thing you've told me is journaling, right? Because I think sometimes external processors ruminate too, right? They just need to say it over and over and over. Is journaling something? I mean, it's I know we've talked about it at nauseum basically now, but is that something you would recommend for an external processor?
For sure. For sure. Because again, you'll be able to pick up on your patterns of when you're ruminating and when you're not. But I think with external processors, what you do want to look at, I guess it could apply to both, but for external processors, you had mentioned in different words, like the idea of oversharing. And you want to catch yourself on that and set some healthy boundaries with yourself of like, hey, okay, maybe my coworkers don't need to know about my trauma or
Right.
to know about my relationship distress and what's going on in my family. So being able to kind of check yourself on those moments and make sure that who you're talking to is actually a safe person for you to be talking to.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Is finding that source that you can bring your information to and make sure they're trusted and it feels like a safe place for you. Relationships, whether it's personal or work related, can often be a major source of tension. A lot of times, our triggers get in the way of productive conversations. What's a way you think we can recognize our triggers and respond to them in a healthy way?
I think it starts with listening to your body. When it comes to recognizing triggers, like I had mentioned, your alarm is going to send the signal to the rest of your body. Your body will be the first indicator that something wrong. Always. It will always be the first indicator that something's wrong. So whether that's you're feeling nauseous and your stomach isn't feeling good, whether it's you're noticing that you are clenching your jaw and you're feeling really like a lot of muscle tension within your jaw, that's the first part of recognizing your triggers. When you notice that you don't feel comfortable in your body, then you have to decide, with using the other parts of your brain that we referenced earlier, what path do I need to go down? Do I need to take a pause to make sure that I can come authentically and respectfully in this conversation? Or do I need to take a couple deep breaths and I feel confident that I'm going to be able to navigate this conversation within my values?
So, I mean, I think when I'm triggered, I feel like a rush. It's just like
That adrenaline.
yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, you talked a little bit about it, but what's something that someone who feels similar could do to make sure they respond in a positive way, right? Awareness is key, but on top of that, what else can they do?
Grounding techniques. I think this is big for trauma and anxiety particularly, but grounding techniques are really important. So deep breathing is considered a grounding technique, but there's other options out there. There's one that I really like to use is the 5-4-3-2-1, which is activating your senses. So if you feel like your adrenaline is causing you to be out of control and out of body, activate your senses. Figure out what's within your control. It'll calm down your nervous system, and then maybe you can check back in with yourself to say, am I ready to have this conversation?
So, I mean, when you speak of grounding techniques, like literally, something I've done in the past is like I go outside, I'll lay on my turf, and I'll just and like I'm literally grounded, and
Yep.
it really changes how I feel. Is that something that people do, or is that just me?
No, that is definitely something people do, but I think you can also even piggyback the idea of activating your senses within that, because when you're laying on the turf, you can say, what are 5 things that I feel right now?
Mm.
Right? I feel the wind touching my skin. I feel the turf, beneath my body. I feel myself wiggle my toes, like whatever that may be. But what it does is it brings you back into the present time. Whereas when your alarm shoots off that signal of danger and you have an adrenaline rush, it's only focusing on survival.
Mm. On the topic of conflict, how can we approach difficult conversations in a way that doesn't disconnect us from ourselves?
Yeah. I mean, working with couples, I like to use the Gottman method. I don't know how familiar people are with that, but a big component to the Gottman method is within your communication skills. And so it's referred to as the 4 horsemen. So if you've never heard of that, I would definitely look it up. But it's the 4 horsemen, and then it gives your antidotes, which are what are ways to replace this behavior. So when you look at starting a conversation, and let's say that you're not feeling good and you feel like conflict is going to arise, you're typically going to lead with criticism. And what I would encourage you to do is lead with a gentle startup. And that's going to look like paying attention to your body language, paying attention to your tone. Your nonverbals are really important. And then lastly, starting with I feel statements. So rather than saying you did this, start with I feel this because of this.
Yeah, I think the criticism is, and I've talked about this in other podcast episodes, where if you start with criticism, you're going to receive some form of criticism back, as opposed to if I come to you and I just say, hey, I feel hurt because you told me that I'm not handsome today, right? Or something like that, right? As opposed to like, you never tell me that I don't look good, right? Or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And I also think that walking into a conversation of conflict, if the person walking into it can start with accountability, saying, I did this, this, and this wrong, it automatically disarms that other person and allows for, just a better engaged, a gentle start, like you said.
Yeah, definitely. I think also what you were saying is when you lead with criticism, you're often going to be met with criticism, which actually moves into the second part of the 4 horsemen, which is defensiveness. So essentially you start with criticism, you move into defensiveness, it leads into contempt, which is you being like more hostile and reactive. And then sometimes it ends with stonewalling, which is your flight mechanism of like, I'm just going to leave the situation, which can be also a form of emotional abuse, depending on how common that is in your communication style.
Yeah, I think we've all probably dealt with stonewalling. And
Myself included.
yeah, I think I've definitely stonewalled as well, right? Just because it's like you said, it's a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
Man, it's an ugly place to be. It's to be a recipient of that. I mean, you're just basically closed out. So I think this is all good information. One thing that I struggle with heavily, I'm very hard on myself. And I think we need to practice more self-love. Can you talk about why self-compassion is important?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, self-love is important just because, like I had mentioned earlier, you're not going to love yourself through a place of hate. So it begins with being able to like recognize and meet yourself with patience. You're not a perfect person. Nobody's a perfect person. But in order to get to the best version of yourself, you have to meet yourself with love. And I think an example that I use is, let's say, the gym, right? New Year's resolution,
Right, right.
year, new me. And people are going to the gym and they're not seeing the results that they want, right? And so they're going to the gym with the idea of, I hate the way that I look, so I'm going to go to the gym. And what that does is it makes you fall off in 2 to 3 weeks because you're still going to hate the way that you look in 2 to 3 weeks. It's not going to be overnight. But instead, if you can go in with the mentality of, I love myself enough to take care of myself, and I love myself enough to move my body and decrease my cortisol levels, you're more likely to accomplish that goal because you're meeting yourself with love instead of with some level of hate or criticism.
Yeah, I think so many people struggle with just not talking kindly to themselves, right? And that definitely changes how you show up in the world, how you show up in your relationships. Subconsciously, people don't even realize this, right? Like if you talk about yourself in a negative way, those things or those flaws that you feel about yourself are gonna show up with how you interact with people
And project onto other people.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't thought about that.
Yeah.
Um, what are some ways that people can practice self-love or self-compassion?
Yeah, this is going to be an uncomfortable answer, but my recommendation would be to, when you wake up in the morning and you're looking in the mirror, to start with positive affirmations. And let me tell you, when I work with people on this, they'll come back and they'll say, I stared at myself in the mirror for 30 fucking minutes and I couldn't come up with anything.
Oh, we.
Right. But being able to be patient with yourself and say, it doesn't have to be anything big. You can meet yourself with like, your hair looks good today, when you're looking at yourself in the mirror, or I like the way my eyes are. It can be something simple like that. And it's going to challenge you to really restructure your brain and the way that you think about yourself. And it's not going to be easy.
Yeah, I think if you do that every day, I'm assuming it probably rewires your brain in some kind of way. Yeah.
Yeah, you're developing a new habit. It's a new skill, right? You're not going to pick up on something first time.
Yeah, I think positive affirmations for me, just in my own life, have been super impactful. I I have there's a list. It takes me probably 3 minutes to run through my affirmations every morning, but it's been impactful for my life, not just personally, but like in business and the things that I've achieved, because I tell myself that over and over that I want to accomplish those things or I want to be this way. And I don't know. Again, I think there's somewhere subconsciously that it just goes in your brain and it's just running in the background while you're out living life. And I think it also put out in the universe,
Manifestation, maybe.
manifestation, I'm big on that. Um, speaking on, I guess to, when we can hold on to like self-hate or, something, something that we hold on to isn't just, criticism. It's the past. I think a lot of people do that. How can we not hold on to things from the past and move forward?
Well, patience is where you want to start. But I guess a way to demonstrate that is ask yourself, how would you support a loved one that's going through the same thing that you are? Right? Because if someone's coming to you and they're saying, I'm feeling shame, right? Let's say they're depressed and they have the symptom of, feeling worthless or shame within themselves. You're not going to go tell that person, well, yeah, you fucking suck.
Right.
Right. You're going to meet them with some level of patience and love and compassion to say like, hey, maybe you didn't show up the best for yourself yesterday. What can we do about that today?
Right. Yeah. I think, holding on. And I think it's also, there's like something to be said about like acceptance when letting go of the past. Right. Cause I mean, it's already happened. You can't change it. And when you bring up, there's some, I'll butcher this, but it's like holding on to the past is like depression, and like thinking into the future is anxiety, and being present is like the most at peace you'll be. Right. So, um, I mean, I don't know. Do you have any tips on acceptance or?
I don't know if I have a direct tip on acceptance, but I think it starts with allowing yourself to move through the process. I think what comes to my mind first with acceptance is grief, and thinking about like the stages of grief. And one of the biggest components to that, whether it's grieving a relationship of someone that passed or grieving a relationship or a job or whatever that still is existing, is that it's never going to be linear. And so you have to be compassionate with yourself that you're going to go through different phases. And at some point, you're going to get to acceptance, but it goes back to not rushing the process.
Yeah, acceptance is good if you can learn how to get there. It was something I'm practicing today. And if you're listening, I hope it's something you practice, because I think the quicker you can find acceptance, the quicker you can find peace.
But don't rush it, people. Don't rush it, people.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, ultimately you want to get there. We want to get there, but if you rush it, what's going to happen is maybe you're not fully healed from it. And then your past comes back up to bite you because you rushed the process.
I mean, what's a way, I guess what's a way to identify that your past is still bothering you? Would it be if simply, I guess this is great. I'm glad that we're into this. Like, someone thinks they're over their past relationship, like, oh, I'm over that person, right? And then they may see that person out, or they may see a picture of that person pop up on social media, and they get that rush of adrenaline, or they get that, that feeling of anxiety, or they feel sick to their stomach. Does that mean that they're not over that person? Does that just mean that there's a trigger there that's still not healed? What is that?
I don't think that that's necessarily an indication that you're not over the person or that you're not healed. I think you're human and we are emotional beings. And with that, you're going to have responses to things that maybe don't feel pleasant all the time. But just because, let's say you ended a relationship, you feel good about it, and you see that person out at a bar 4 years later, your alarm gets turned on because you weren't thinking that you were going to face this situation today. It's unexpected. And so if you're able to move through that and recognize, okay, maybe I have the rush of adrenaline, but let me try to access the other parts of my brain that shows you that maybe you are actually healing and that you're doing what you need to do, but you're just human and the emotions are going to come up. So no, I don't think that that's an indication of whether you've moved on from the relationship or not. I don't think that has anything to do with it.
That's some more good information. All right. Are you ready for the famous question that we ask everyone that comes on this show? Called the wiggle room, right? So do you have, or will you share a moment in your life where you ran out of wiggle room?
Yeah. I mean, I've been anticipating this question. And I think that it's a great question and I actually look forward to your other episodes to see what other people's stories are and what their wiggle room moment is. For me, I think it's something that I'm still currently going through. And I think it kind of circles back to why I got into this field, right? So I was born with the skill of empathy. And with that comes toxic empathy. And so that's something that I'm still currently kind of like navigating, where like when I love someone really hard. And as a result, I think I put other people's feelings before my own. And so right now I'm kind of in the process of recognizing like, what are the boundaries that I need to hold with myself? And it's not because I don't know what they are or how to go about it, but it's because I demonstrate toxic empathy, where if someone has gone through something worse than me, or if someone has gone through something, really difficult, I prioritize them above me.
So you're not, I mean, when I hear that, basically what it sounds like is that you're not putting boundaries in place for yourself, and you're suffering as opposed to, I guess, maybe having empathy for that other person, whereas to you should be, I guess, showing up for yourself in those moments. Is that the I guess, am I interpreting?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's not necessarily that I don't set boundaries. I think it's maybe more so that throughout my life I haven't upheld those boundaries in maybe the ways that I should. And I think for me, what I've recognized is that like both parts can exist, where I can be empathetic towards somebody else while still recognizing that my wants and needs are a priority. And I'm the only one that can prioritize those wants and needs. And it goes back to a saying I think I said earlier, which is whatever you're not changing, you're choosing. And I have to be honest and accountable with myself in order to work through that, I have been, like I mentioned, but that definitely is my no wiggle room moment, and something that I've been experiencing probably for the last year and a half.
What are you, I mean, what has that experience taught you about yourself, or what do you practice to try to be better at that?
Saying no if I need to, right? Or not responding if I don't need to respond, or I think just taking, it depends on the day, but being able to like prioritize and nurture myself whenever I need to.
What do you, I want to touch on the not responding, right? Because I think that's a big thing, and there's people that can interpret that a lot of different ways, right? You could say, uh, you're ignoring me, on purpose, or like I
And
could.
that's, sorry to interrupt, but that's where when you had asked me about the intent versus impact, and I said it's murky because it can be manipulated. When someone doesn't respond, it's not leaving a good impact, and they can use that, and manipulate the situation.
Yeah, I think people. So let's say that you and I were having a conversation, or you and I were in conflict, and for your boundary, you're like, I don't need to respond right now. Now, while I don't agree, I think maybe why I don't agree with that's necessarily the best reaction. I think it's hard for the person that's the recipient of that to understand, like they're just putting boundaries in place, and they're doing what's best for them at
Yeah.
that moment.
I think communication is big on that too. Like it's okay to take the time and set the boundary, but I guess if you are wanting to continue that relationship, then it's important to communicate, hey, I need a couple minutes, and then take that time out. If it's not a relationship you want to continue, then prioritizing your wants and needs.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing your no wiggle room moment.
Absolutely.
If there's just one thing that you could pass on to the world about, or that you would want people to remember about your work and your life, what would it be?
Go back to your values.
Go back to your values.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we didn't touch on that, huh? Oh, we need to talk about that. So that's something that that's been another big game changer for me. When someone feels disconnected from themselves, what, so let's say I'm feeling, I have the adrenaline going through me, and I don't know how to, because we've actually experienced these moments before, and I'm like, hey, I don't know what to do right here, right? I'm feeling like I want to go left. What was your response to me?
Go back to your values.
Yeah. So for someone who doesn't understand what that means, can you talk a little bit more about that?
I think everyone understands what it means, but they may not understand how to demonstrate that. And I think my answer to that is we all have contributions in life. We all leave this earth with whatever those contributions are, whatever impact we want to leave. And you get to decide what you want that to look like for yourself. And those values can be based upon how you were brought up. So if you grew up within a household that has a faith-based system, then you go back to those values. If you grew up with a family that values work ethic and integrity, then go back to those values. Now, let's say you didn't grow up with a model or values that you want to portray, then be open and observe and be aware of what's going on in the world. Think about how people make you feel. Did you like the way that someone showed love to you that day, or respected you that day, or communicated with you that day? And look at that, and then figure out how you want to model that for yourself and for your relationships and others.
Yeah, that was another game changer for me, and it's a practice that I use all the time now. It's like, hey, if you weren't dysregulated in this moment, what would you do? I would be kind. I would show up with love. I would be in service, right? I would ask how I can help, as opposed to just wanting to stonewall or wanting to ignore in a toxic way. I love that concept. I think, I don't know, that one and impact versus intent are like two staples in my life. But yeah.
Yeah, which essentially, going back to like the areas of the brain, all that's stored into your memory bank. Like, how do you want to show up? Who do you want to be today? But your alarm is overriding that. And so that's an easy way to bring your alarm down, is ask yourself, like, who do I want to be in this moment? How do I want to contribute to society, to my relationships, to myself? And that's where you can pause, slow down, take a moment and figure out, okay, well, you know what? I'm pretty pissed, but I still want to lead with kindness.
Yeah. All great, impactful, wonderful things. Thank you for showing up and being here. I'm super, super grateful that people got some insight into all the gems that you've given me. I'm telling you, our friendship is a cheat code, and I'm so grateful for you. Do you have anything you want to share with the world before we get out of here?
I think I've shared it all. I mean, I appreciate you having me. I think that, Matt, you are also a cheat code in a friendship in your own, maybe not therapeutic, but spiritual way. And it's definitely, my favorite word is reciprocity. And I think that the relationship definitely has that. And I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. Before I let you go, though, if someone wants to use your services, right, which I think is super important, your license in Arizona, how can someone reach out to you to begin connecting with you and working with you?
Yeah, I mean, I can probably provide you that information because it's a little bit lengthy, but my website is www.matherapy.us, so Metanoia Alliance, but matherapy.us, and you can reach out to me that way. I am also on Instagram, but I don't use that for like my therapeutic connections, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great for people to start their journey in healing. If there's one thing that you take away from this episode today, I hope it's that you learn how to start being aware, right? Being aware of your triggers and how to respond in those moments. Again, I want to thank Sheena for being with us today. A lot of things to take away and think about. And thanks for being here at the Wiggle Room. I'll see y'all soon.